All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to another MassMEDIC webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about Introduction to Patient Engagement in MedTech in the U.S. It's a really exciting topic, as you'll hear more about from our partners in 1 minute. But we have worked to this last year, really led by Alira Health, to develop this playbook that you're going to hear about. And it's super exciting as a patient myself. If you haven't had the chance to meet me, I'm Nicole Owens, the Director of Marketing Communications for MassMEDIC. We are a membership-based trade association for medical device industry in New England and beyond. We work to bolster the industry through events like this, connection, advocacy, and awareness. Just a few quick housekeeping notes in regard to today's program. It is being recorded, so everyone who registered for it will get a chance to see it after. We also encourage you to download the playbook, and you're going to hear more about how to do that in today's conversation to make sure that you get all of this robust information. And we are going to have time for Q&A, as well as a couple interactive sessions in today's program. So please make sure you are engaging. And you can put your questions anytime right in the Q&A function, and we'll make sure that we get to them, whether live or follow up with you after. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our moderator for today, Annabelle De Maria. She is the Chief Patient Officer for Alira Health. Annabelle.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I would like to show you the agenda. If we can please move to the next slide. What we are planning to talk about today is, first of all, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction and background on the patient engagement think tank. Afterwards, my colleague Amy Leung is going to introduce the topic of patient engagement in clinical. After that, Shannon Kelson will introduce patient engagement in regulatory and market access. And the patient engagement commercialization matrix will be introduced by Elisa Mendoza. So if we can move, please, to the next slide, I would like to explain you a little bit who is with me today. The first speaker that I'm going to introduce is Elisa Mendoza. Elisa is the Senior Director of Advocacy and Government Affairs at Insulet. And I would like to give her the floor. Good morning, Elisa. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning. Thank you, Annabelle. Hello, everyone. I'm really honored to be here. My name, again, is Elisa Mendoza. By trade, I'm a registered dietitian and a diabetes care and education specialist. I work as the Senior Director of Advocacy and Government Affairs at Insulet, and I live in Connecticut. Thank you again for joining.
Thank you so much, Elisa. The next slide, you can see the bio of my colleague, Shannon Kelson. Shannon is Patient Advocacy Manager at Abiomed. Good morning, Shannon. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. As Annabelle said, my name is Shannon Kelson. I am the Patient Advocacy Manager at Abiomed, a leading provider of groundbreaking medical technology that provides circulatory and oxygenation support. It's an honor to be a part of this important initiative to grow the patient voice in all aspects of the medical device lifecycle. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much, Shannon. So last speaker is Amy Leung. Amy is President and CEO of Health Motivation, but Amy is also a patient advocate from the Center of Patient Advocate Leaders. Good morning, Amy. Oh, sorry, Amy, you're on mute.
I'm delighted to be here, and good morning from Santa Barbara, California. I'm also a patient in that I am the owner of some 21 joint replacements, a lot of metal rods and plates in my body, and stents. So from the voice of experience, I have been involved with the National Institute of Health, the Agency for Healthcare Quality and Research, the Patient Center Outcomes Institute, and last but certainly never least, the FDA Patient Engagement Advisory Committee. Delighted to be here.
Thank you, Amy. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm the last one. My name is Annabelle De Maria. I am the Chief Patient Officer at Alira after 25 years working on patient engagement in the pharmaceutical industry. I am very happy to be here today after 18 months of working together with my colleagues. As you can see today, We are very international. My colleagues introduced themselves. Where did they connect from? Myself, I am based in Barcelona, in Spain. So this is a very international team that we are going to share with you today, all the expertise that we accumulate after 18 months of working together. So let's kick off. And we'll kick off by giving you a little bit of a background of how did this all start. And this all started with a survey that we produced for the MedTech industry. So if we move to the next slide, please. That was a survey that it was including a very important number of questions. However, today we will introduce 3 of them. But what we wanted to show you is that after launching the survey, we ended up with 949 respondents, which is a very good sample. And the respondents were coming from very different type of organization size. As you can see on the screen, there was always very different type of roles participating in the survey, as well as different departments, which it gives us I would dare to say, it enriched a lot the type of knowledge that we got from the survey. So as an introduction, I would like to explain you how or what were the most important questions that we raised during that survey, that it helped as a foundation of the work that we have done. So if we move to the next slide, our first question, and maybe the most important one, was that we wanted to understand how relevant within the organization it is to include patients' perspectives in the life cycle management of the process. And as you can see on the slide, more than 60% of the respondents believe that including patients' perspective in the life cycle management is either important or highly important. These are really good news. And if you please move to our next slide, you're going to see that in our next question, we asked them, okay, would you please tell us where are you in your organizations in terms of implementing patient engagement? So what's your experience level? And good news is that MedTechs are increasingly implementing patient engagement in their organization, although only 15% of respondents have implemented the most advanced level of patient engagement experience. Up to 60% of the companies confirm either ongoing implementation or planning initiation. There seems to be an important journey for us to go here, but good news are that we are on the way. And the last slide that I would like to introduce you about the survey is we asked them if we, please, thank you. We asked them, okay, so for those who have already started, are in the process, at what stages your organizations are engaging patients in the development life cycle process. And just to mention here that this question was allowing multiple responses. And the higher rate of collaboration with patients was observed within areas like research, design, and planning, as well as regulatory advice. There is also considerable interaction during the pre-launch period. Basically, we believe that is because they would like to understand very well the patient journey before entering into a new market. So as you can see on the screen, there's areas like HTA or pharmacovigilance or even during the post-launch where the interaction with patients is not that high. However, numbers gave us a very good picture. If we can please move to the next slide, for us to decide that there was room for working together, a group of people on how should we understand the patient engagement function in the MedTech industry. And the way that it worked, if we move to the next slide, please, it was that we put together a group of people coming from different MedTech companies. You will see at the bottom of this slide who were the participants of this think tank. This was based on companies coming from different sectors like 3M, Abiomed, Boston Scientific, Exact Science, Insulet, and Smith&Nephew. We also had MassMEDIC working with us. We for sure needed the vision of the patients in this group, and that was that came from the Center for Patient Advocacy Leaders, who were participating in the group with 4 patient advocates. And finally, Alira Health was moderating the whole process. The way we did it was by setting up different sessions. They were all on the format of a workshop. We started back in September last year in 2021. with the identification of gaps and opportunities within the patient engagement. And then we decided to focus our efforts on, based on the whole life cycle management of a medical device or a diagnostic tool. We wanted to understand in each of our workshops how patient engagement should look like in each of these stages. So we focus our second workshop in clinical, our third workshop in regulatory, and finally, last workshop in pre and post commercialization phases. This was all with the aim, with the objective to define the role of patient engagement in the MedTech industry, to ultimately develop a framework, which in our case, it became the so-called playbook, that standardize patient engagement practices throughout the lifecycle management of medical devices and diagnostic to enable MedTech participants to better serve patients' needs, increase access, and improve outcomes. So what you're gonna listen today through the different presentations is an extract of information from this playbook that you can all download from the website, where we will, at the end of this presentation, we'll show you the how. So what we'll see today is an extract of the most important information coming from this playbook. But before starting this presentation, I would like to just, if we can please move to the next slide. I would just like to read aloud what is the definition of patient engagement that the think tank ended up with. And that is important because right after this definition that I'm going to read aloud, I'm going to launch a poll and would like to understand from the audience how close to this definition your organizations are right now. So for us, patient engagement is a systematic approach to ensure that patients' experience, perspectives, and priorities are captured and meaningfully incorporated into the whole life cycle management by establishing a mutually beneficial partnership between manufacturers and patients, with the goal of generating products and solutions that serve patient needs, increase the access, and improve the outcomes. So if you please would like to help me on understand where's the audience towards referring to this presentation, we would like to launch this poll that you can see currently on the screen. And if you can please let us know to what extent is your company following the definition of patient engagement. This is a single choice. You just have to select on the screen the one that you feel is closer to your organization. I'll leave you 30 seconds for us to vote. So this is an easy one. I think that we can close the poll and see the results. Look at this. Okay, so 65% of the respondents of the audience today is already working on patient engagement. However, it is only working on some areas of the organization. I'm happy to see that 12% is fully working on patient engagement on all areas. This is really exciting. And for those who are not started yet, that's totally fine. I guess that today we're going to give you some tips and ideas on where you can start from. So thank you so much. That gives you a very good idea and a picture of where is the audience who's attending today. So with this, I'm going to pass the floor to my colleague, Amy. She's going to focus on explaining you what is the playbook summarizing about patient engagement in clinical. Thank you, Amy.
Great. Thank you, Annabelle. I really appreciate that. If we can go to, yes, stay at that slide, please. As Annabelle has indicated, and as we all know throughout the country, there has been a cultural shift in the way that society is understanding the patient's role in healthcare. Yet, as Annabelle has shown through our survey and also through the survey that we've just done, that there still are rooms for opportunity to actually come up to that same kind of improvement in terms of clinical research where patients are engaged in a meaningful way. I point you to the January 26, 2022 FDA guidance entitled Patient Engagement in Design and Conduct of Medical Device Clinical Studies, which says right from the very beginning a foundational view, and I quote, "The FDA values the experience and perspectives of patients and their caregivers. The FDA believes that these individuals can and should be able to provide their insights about a disease or a condition, including living with that disease or condition, and the impact of medical devices in the diagnosis, treatment, and management of these conditions through engagement activities. Patient advisors, or those patients who then become educated enough about the clinical process and are invited to join a development team, serve in an advisory or consultative capacity, can share their experiences living with a medical condition to help improve clinical study design and conduct without participating in the actual research study themselves," straight from the FDA. So with that, we in the think tank came up with a description of patient engagement in the clinical development, which turned out to be actually a value proposition as well. And I will, as we had done with the definition of patient engagement, read that to you. Engaging patients in medical device, clinical trials, or clinical studies to design studies that reflect what patients value and feel, facilitating their active participation and addressing any shortcomings of existing research solutions, thereby enabling the collection of impactful data that resonates with patients and their families, and the execution of efficiency in trials and the resolution of unmet needs. And this was a critical statement for the think tank to come to, because the aspect of value, I'm sure, has been discussed within your own organizations, the value of patient engagement. And so it is the beginning of a process that can and has the support of the FDA to yield significant results. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Pains and gains, or challenges and opportunities, if you might want to call it, in patient engagement in the early clinical phases. This is a very lengthy, maybe difficult to read kind of slide, but permit me to just give you some highlights. In terms of looking from the task force perspective, where are the challenges? Where are the challenges that all companies and even patient organizations and patients face? And what are the opportunities that exist for us all? The barriers to successful implementation of patient engagement during the clinical phases center around gaps in knowledge, perception, infrastructure, and logistics, and can be segmented into those related to the patients, the trial itself with the sponsors, and MedTech itself. So the examples that we've given here on the left-hand column of pains are things like, as we said, just the lack of lower awareness, if you will, and subsequent appreciation of its benefits and potential benefits. The think tank came up with different kinds of abstract kinds of things, meaning it's ethically good to involve patients who are going to be using this, or who are the ultimate end users of objects and devices. But we've chose to focus on the tangible parts, the part that actually relate to the improvement of design, or the improvement of the outcomes mentioned, thus the improvement of patient journeys and reducing dropout rates. In terms of gains, there were quite a few. This is just a highlight of them. Those gains, let me back up a little bit. On the pain side, I think an important one is the patient perception that their input is not valued. And this is uniform that we've heard on the patient advocacy side, that why do it? They ask us for data and they don't get back to us. They don't tell us the why. They don't inquire enough of us to make it meaningful. And so the idea of the journey of the patient before you develop your research agenda, your research priorities is very, very important. In terms of means, a lot of as I said, the ethical benefits of engaging patients in clinical trials has been demonstrated and is known and accepted, but there are many more pragmatic reasons that could be feasibly improve clinical trial efficacy. And these gains include the potential impact on clinical trial on the patient and the industry perceptions, and certainly on regulatory submissions, meaning less amendments and other kinds of gains in that kind of way. There's improved recruitment, accrual, and retention, which can lower costs and reduce the length of time that resources take to administer a particular activity. There are fewer costly protocol amendments, as I mentioned, and that the family and the patient insights. And when I say patient, I also mean family, because the perspective of family dealing with the patient is an enhancement of the patient journey. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I can tell you that my husband should be asked various questions in order to enhance my aspect of how I feel. And so these kinds of things are not really taken a look at. And so the opportunity is great in this regard. Next slide, please. So, back one more, please. So this is another excellent slide that talks about the life cycle. You have at stage 0, which is before you even get to determining, as I mentioned before, your research priorities, is looking at and giving understand their journey. It's not always a consistent line or phase that goes on and on, but it is the ups and downs of whatever it may be. I can tell you in medical devices, I'm always, as someone with rheumatoid arthritis, looking at ways to improve my efficiency in the house, in the office, on the road, dealing with children, dealing with others who don't understand. And so the knowledge, the explanations, the communication, and then the applications are really important. And unless a company really gets into it in a deep way, and I know the question is, well, how are we going to find these people? And we'll come to that in just a little bit. It's really important to set out the intent to look into that patient journey, because they will be different. They will be different depending on they're on medications, if they have access to care, if there are economic issues or work-related issues. Those kinds of aspects that we might call socioeconomic are an actually important part of a patient dealing with their disease. And so there's different kinds of ways of doing this. You analyze that patient journey, you talk to the caregiver, you give time and listening opportunity to understand even the way it's described by a patient and the caregiver. The second piece is moving on to your research priorities. It's important to do this between what that patient is saying and the inefficiencies of whatever might be in terms of your project and your device, and really what are unmet needs. Looking at unmet needs means a lot of different things. Are you sure you're talking to the right kinds of patients? Is there a diversity of the patients in terms of the geography, the age, the racial and ethnic profiles, the duration of disease, and effect of the disease, those kinds of things. So matching those needs with your research agenda is extremely important to done. Can be done when working with the patient advisors on your team, and defining those patient relevant added value outcomes. These are the kinds of things that, for example, when patients are engaged, they themselves become your champions for the research, to encourage other people to get involved, to help you define research priorities according to them, but as they mesh with your priorities. The second piece, actually the third piece, but the second on the research side, is research design and plan. Here, the protocols important to, as I said, take out your target population. Are you only looking at people with arthritis? Is this something that somebody with diabetes has difficulties in doing because of medications or timing of work? Assessing risk. What I may think important as a patient is something that you may, as a researcher and a PI, not think is important. And so the conversation that ensues as a result of that is extremely important. And finally, and other adherence and logistical kinds of things have to be taken into account when you engage patients. We have patients, and I'm sure you know, that patients need bus fare or a transportation to and from sites of where they're going to be holding the assessments. Those kinds of things have to be considered. So you would understand that in the early stages through the patient journey. And then finally, that leading to the third, research, conduct, and operations. And here is where patient adherence, improving access for patients to get involved in research. And these are where opportunities like clinicaltrials.gov and other many websites like that who can be very, very helpful. Hospitals have listings of their own. This improves communication with trial participants when you have a patient advisor on board who can look at the different kinds of protocols that need to be approved by the patient. Is this patient friendly? So there's a variety of different things that can be done, but we give you an idea what this process is and how patient engagement can be active and activated in those areas. Next slide, please. Oops, there is a question there.
Then we are passing the floor to Shannon, Amy, for the next topic.
Okay.
Right?
There was a question though. No, there's a poll.
We
Poll.
yes, you're right. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder. So the floor is yours for the poll.
Can you go back one slide? There we go. So this is a time when we want to hear from you and that you can hear from everyone else who's on the call. The question we're asking you in this area is your company assessing with patients the protocols of your clinical trials and clinical projects? The first choice is not at all. Second choice is just in some specific trials. And the third is every protocol is checked with patients. And you'll have 30 seconds to respond. Please respond now. Okay, if the last has come in, can you please bring it up, the summary? Here we go. Okay, very interesting. So 47% of you have said not at all. So lots of opportunity in front of you. 40% have said just in some specific trials. Very interesting. I'd be curious about which specific trials have you had that kind of success with. And the third, lots of room for improvement at 13%. Every protocol is checked with patients, meaning you're doing it well. Actually, sorry, my reverse, that every protocol is checked with patients. So this is a number that hopefully will grow through time and through experience. So thank you so very much. I hope this has been very helpful to you. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our next speaker, my colleague, Shannon Kelson, who has spent 13 years with Abiomed, and she is the Patient Advocacy Manager for Abiomed. She's also an active participant of our patient engagement think tank. Shannon, I hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. As Amy mentioned, over the last several years, there has been an evolution in the patient experience as a part of the MedTech product lifecycle. So when we consider regulatory and market access, patients have always been the heart of this process. But rather than just data, there is now a voice to represent this patient experience. You can go to the next slide, please. So when the think tank members reviewed patient engagement and regulatory and market access, the consensus was that there is so much opportunity in this area that will make an enormous impact for patients and the companies working to serve these patients. When we defined it, there is a need to engage patients during the medical device regulatory and market access processes. Incorporating the patient voice will not only elevate patient needs to the attention of the FDA, payers, and other policymakers, but it will also optimize regulatory approval, time to market, ROI, market access, coverage, and payment determinants. And it is important to note that this must include all insights around patients' experience, not just patient-generated data. So it's essential to partner with the patients who are impacted by this disease. Partner with the people who are most impacted by this disease, and that's the patients and their caregivers. So next slide, please. As a group, we discussed again the pains and gains of patient engagement and regulatory phases. As you can see, there's many pains and gains, so I'll talk about a few. I'll begin with the pains, and they essentially revolve around the fact that many companies do not have the blueprint to engage patients in this process. There's a resounding lack of clarity for MedTech companies on the proven benefits of engaging patients during these processes. So because this has not yet been in general practice, we've not yet to see the true impact that it can make. There's a perception of high monetary and time costs and unproven ROI. So some may believe this will cost a lot of money and time without true value, but that's really not the case, as we will discuss. There's insufficiently understood FDA expectations towards evaluation and patient outcome experiences and preferences in the regulatory processes. So there needs to be more clarity on the expectations, but again, since this is a relatively new process, there's still lack of communication regarding advantages of patient engagement in this area. But there is always a variability of submission expectations and requirements depending on the device classification. So if you're considering implantable versus continuating monitoring devices, there's going to be different expectations for depending on what you're presenting. However, if we implement patient engagement in the regulatory process, the gains would be substantial. So there's potential for favorable review by the FDA, resulting from provision from the MedTech companies of patient-reported outcomes, patient preference information, or patient-generated data. There's increased patient trust in the regulatory process and consequently greater trust in the product's efficacy and safety. And so there's more transparency around the process by including the patient. There's potential for more accurate and complete adverse events reporting. You're connecting the patients directly with the regulators, so they're able to give, real-time feedback on how things work, how they actually feel, and it benefits the safety of the medical device. And overall, there's an improved patient sentiment that the MedTech company has valued their input. The patients feel like they are directly impacting the outcome and are part of your mission. So although data is imperative to this process, the voice of the patient is bringing new life to the process. It may help to ensure that data collection is in fact relevant to the everyday challenges faced by the patient, and overall just gives a better understanding of what it really feels like to be the patient. This is really a partnership between the MedTech company and the patients the company works to treat. The next slide. So regulatory and market access really go hand in hand. When we reviewed pains and gains of market access, you can see many points again listed. To cover a few, there's lack of payer guidance and the role of patient engagement during this process, including the extent which the patients can be involved in the process. So many don't know it's an option to engage patients during market access. There's lack of understanding of the extent to which payers value patient engagement activities and real-world evidence. Again, around this common theme of just the knowledge, and really it's something, when we look at this, it's something we need to take on to ourselves to educate people that this is something we can do. There's variability in payers' expectation, acceptance and utilization of patient-reported outcomes, experiences, and patient preference information. And really the gains of enhancing patient engagement in the market access process greatly outweigh the pains. So there's the potential for market access advantages due to generation of patient engagement data, such as patient-reported outcomes, patient-reported experiences, patient preference information. So some of the advantages might include establishing, sustaining competitive reimbursement, convincing payers of efficacy and cost savings associated with the device, and opportunity to increase available data for payer measurements of patient quality of life and burden. Additionally, there's a more compelling story. So if payers receive insights from a patient in the form of testimony or letters, and from the patients, providers, or family members, it ultimately puts a face to this data and makes it more human. And there's greater patient impact directly on the market to achieve access to a medical device they desire or otherwise need to improve their quality of life or lessen their burden. So this in turn gives the patients the power to influence access to care for others who may benefit. Next slide. So when we're looking at areas and ways we can increase engagement, regulatory, market access, in terms of evaluation dissemination, you can involve patients in the assessment of challenges, opportunities, barriers, and levers in regulatory framework. You can include them in involvement of conformity assessment, which determines requirements are met for that medical device, and participation in regulatory affairs activities like package leaflets, user instructions, or additional materials that you might be able to distribute. And additionally, you can engage patients for HTA and pharmacovigilance, so assessment of value, patient-relevant outcomes, and patient priorities. And lastly, design a real-world evidence plan, including quality of life and patient-relevant outcomes. Really just including the patient in every area of this process. So I'm now just going to pass it on to Alira Mendoza to discuss the patient engagement of commercialization.
Thank you, Shannon. Next slide, please. So there are also barriers to patient engagement in the commercialization of a device. Next slide, please. There are two dimensions that the think tank looked at related to the barriers in commercialization. One is presentation rate, and two is the likelihood of diagnosis, treatment, or quality of life. In order to overcome these specific pains, you need to work on both of these dimensions and have effective activities that focus on both. I'd like to talk about a little bit about the presentation rate first. What it means is the degree of patient appearance at the specialist office. So what can contribute to this and maybe this inhibiting people attending the physician's office? So one is that patients are very different. They have different backgrounds and different ethnicities, and this can present challenges for specialists. So if you think about COVID was really challenging. If a woman found a lump in their breast pre-COVID, there's a specific journey and they'd see the specialist pretty quickly. If they found it during COVID, it would really limit the time that it would take the person to unfortunately see the specialist. The second one are referrals. When you see a specialist, it takes an awful lot of time to see that specialist. If you put a referral into that process, it extends the time. So that can really increase the presentation rate. The third is the lack of understanding by the patient and healthcare provider. The healthcare provider may have an unconscious bias or not fully understand the social determinants of health. I think about insulin pumps. I've been an insulin pump trainer for 25 years, and there's some physicians that still think that only people that are well-educated should be on insulin pumps, and we know that's not true. And then, of course, there's lack of coverage and affordable access to both devices and specialists that, as a result, limits people's ability to see a specialist. Now I'd like to explore the likelihood of diagnosis, treatment, or quality of life. So that means the probability of a patient being diagnosed, treated, or having quality of life improvements. The first pain might be a deficiency of centers of excellence. So where is this specialist? If you live in a rural area, it might be really difficult for you to get to that specialist. The second one is the lack of device effectiveness. If the device does not work, the patient is not going to use it, and the physician is not going to prescribe it. The third is potential side effects. If a patient experiences side effects, similarly, they're not going to utilize it, and then it will negatively influence the outcomes and the success of treatment. The fourth is the ease of use difficulties. And this is related to what the device looks like, the form factor, and if it's not easy to use, again, people will not use it. And then, of course, the last one is lack of coverage or affordable access to care. Is the device available to insurance? Does the patient know how to navigate the insurance company? What's the cost of the device, and is it available to everyone? Next slide, please. So in the think tank, we developed a methodology for activities to overcome the pains. And if you look at the y-axis, presentation rate is stated. And if you look at the x-axis, the likelihood of diagnosis, treatment, or quality of life improvement is stated. And there are 4 quadrants. The goal, of course, is to get to that upper right quadrant, high presentation rate and high likelihood of diagnosis, treatment, of quality of life improvement. How do you get there? You have to identify activities to get you there. So first, we recommend identifying the current magnitude of the presentation rate and likelihood of diagnosis, treatment, or quality of life. Where do you fall as an organization in this matrix? And then based on the magnitude, classify the quadrant the target disease type is located. The initial activities target for each dimension will be based on the quadrant the target disease is located. So for example, in the lower right quadrant, low presentation rate, high likelihood of diagnosis, treatment, or quality of life, you might have a patient that is very, very eager, very motivated, has access to treatment, however, is not able to see a specialist. So what activities can be done to get that patient to see that specialist? So activities for each dimension are progressively executed. Like I said, you have to do it in both presentation rate and quality of life improvement, diagnosis and treatment. And the goal is to move up the spectrum to that upper right quartile. Next slide, please. So let's explore presentation rate activities and what could you do to increase the presentation rate. There are several things, and I know Amy alluded to this. Gain insights on the condition. Know everything and anything about this disease state. Again, I work in diabetes, type 1, type 2, really everything about it. What are the characteristics? How is it diagnosed? What are the socioeconomic factors that impact it? Really know your patient and gather insights from the patient. Don't just do market research. Reach out to advocacy groups and get those insights. Reach out to patients and get those insights early on. The second is, how do you mobilize the patients towards the healthcare providers? And there's many ways to do this. One is really understanding that patient journey and what some of the obstacles are in that journey and how to identify them. Also, you can increase awareness. There's creating awareness campaigns, developing websites. There's many things you can do to increase awareness of diabetes or other disease states. And who's the right specialist? Of course, for diabetes, it could be an endocrinologist, but a lot of people see primary care physicians. They see NPs, they see PAs, they see CVEs, they see tons of people. So any activity you can to get these folks to a specialist would be great. And the third one is to help healthcare providers and patients manage disease. And that goes also, again, with gathering the insights. So can you develop partnerships that are mutually beneficial with advocacy groups that help address healthcare providers and patients better manage disease? Are there CE programs that healthcare providers can take to better understand the device and the disease? So those are just some ways that you can improve the activities and presentation rate to get to that upper right quartile. Next slide, please. Let's explore the likelihood of diagnosis, treatment, or quality of life improvements. And this extends all the way back to R&D, like Amy said, and that is really involving people in the development of the devices. So again, what is that form factor? Is it usability trials, accessibility challenges, R&D, really early on. So we're really thinking about things throughout the patient journey. The second is to educate people about the expectations. And we all know if the physician and the patient have different expectations and are not aligned, it will not contribute to success. So could there be education programs? the physician and the patient dialogue discuss this in advance, so they are aligned in terms of what this diagnosis, treatment, or quality of life improvement goals are. The third is to support patient access. And, I know in the community I work with, this is just so huge right now. People that need the devices cannot necessarily afford them. They don't know how to navigate insurance companies. It's so complex right now. So can you develop tools to help them understand how to navigate and advocate for themselves with insurance companies, with their employers? Can you develop financial options and provide assistance for that? So what can you do to help that person get affordable access to your device? The last thing is to design adherence programs. So how do you keep this person on the device? What can you do? Are there apps? Are there behavioral tools? What are the barriers and how can you address them through educational tools and resources? Next slide, please. So just as a summary, the executed activities that you think of based on where you are in that matrix to get to that upper right quartile lead to gains and in the commercialization process. So as far as presentation rate, you need to gain insights on that condition and know your patient, know the journey. You need to mobilize these patients towards the healthcare provider. Who are the appropriate healthcare providers? How do you gain access to them? How do you mobilize them to get there? And then you have to help patients and healthcare providers manage the disease. What are the goals? Are they aligned in the expectations? Will contribute to success and a higher presentation rate. If we look at the summary of higher likelihood of diagnosed treatment or quality of life improvement, starting early on in the patient journey in the life cycle process in R&D and really implementing all of the things that Amy talked about and generating those insights early on. Accessibility challenges, make sure you take that into consideration and all the other characteristics of the patient population. You need to educate them about expectations, and that goes back to the alignment. Is everyone aligned in the diagnosis? Do they understand the disease that they have? Do they understand their treatment path and what the options they have? And do they understand the quality of life improvements you get? If a drug causes nausea for the first week, they need to know that and they need to get through it because the outcome in the future is going to be tremendous. But if they don't know the drug may cause nausea, they're going to stop it. So really, really align on those expectations. We talked about support and patient access. Again, tremendous right now. People don't have access that need it. How do we work with payers? How do we work with regulatory bodies? How do we ensure that people have access and know how to advocate for themselves and navigate that journey? And the last one is adherence programs. Let's make sure that people know and understand how to stay on these products, use behavioral tools, use gamification, use things that will really help them adhere and stay on the device or product. So with that being said, thank you very much. And I'd like to pass it on to Annabelle.
Thank you, Alisa. Amazing work from the speakers. Thank you so much. We have a few questions from the chat that I'm gonna direct to the speakers. However, as a reminder, please, to the audience, whoever who may have any extra question, please chat it. You can leave it in the chat. But in the meantime, I would like to raise some of those questions for our speakers. And so I'm gonna assign this first question to Alisa because it's kind of related of the corporate goal. And the question is, what's the stage of the life cycle management when I should start working in patient engagement?
R&D, and even prior, if you have human factors, usability, what I do is I work with patient advocacy groups and I encourage my team, the teams throughout my organization to generate insights from these advocacy groups and apply it throughout the patient life cycle. So don't just start at commercialization, don't start at regulatory, start as early as you can in the process because those insights are going to pave the way moving forward and are going to contribute to success.
Thank you. Is there any other of our speakers who would like to build on it? Maybe Shannon.
I think it's a great point, Alyssa, to say start as early as you can, but it doesn't mean you have to start at a certain phase. You can start in any order. Don't feel like because you didn't start in R&D, you can't start in commercialization. So you can always pull patients in and engage them regardless of what phase you're at.
That's a very good point indeed. Here's a question related to clinical trials where maybe Amy, you could respond to what are the tools I should use to engage patients in the assessment of clinical trials?
And this is a very interesting question because it depends on how well you know the patients that you're dealing with. So I'm going to make a couple assumptions here. Number one, that you have patients as a targeted population. You have identified that. And number two, you want someone who you, as a patient, and as the FDA calls a patient advisor, someone who knows enough, maybe from an experiential standpoint, like myself, or someone else who's actually in a researcher themselves, but also a patient, to talk with them, to engage them as a part of your development team. And so the conversations that the patient advisor is involved in is the same ones that you and your colleagues on the development team would be having. Participating as a patient, as I have done in these development team conversations, can be difficult for patients at times, but it was established very early on because of my lack of knowledge about the research process early on, that whenever I had a question, the group was willing to take time to respond. What is a chi-square? What do you mean by a percentage confidence? Those kinds of things. And it was just a short explanation. Outcomes measures in rheumatology clinical trials, an international consortium working in rheumatology, bones and joints, if you will, started to engage patients, and I was among the first some 20 years ago. One of the first things we decided as patients was we didn't really understand the clinical language being used. And so we took it upon ourselves, and working with our health professionals, to develop a glossary, which has actually been used now for some 30 years, not only for the patients to help them understand clinical processes, clinical trials, but also for fellows and anyone else who just needed a little bit of uptake on better understanding clinical process. And so it was developed by patients for patients, but it ended up being used and is available online for others involved in the research initiatives.
Right, what a nice experience, the one that you shared with us.
Yeah.
Here goes another question. I'm gonna assign it to Shannon because it's around what areas in my organization should I involve? I assume they are referring when it comes to patient engagement for sure, but so I leave it to Shannon to start.
I think our overall message is any and all areas. You are working to serve patients. So in every phase, every department, you can involve patients, bring them in, connect them with your employees, make sure that there is that communication between the two, because ultimately we want to best serve our patients. And I think, starting in any phase is key.
Okay, so when it comes to specific areas in your organization, do you work with any areas? I mean, is it patient engagement fully transversal function?
So in terms of with the company and employees, is that what the question is for department?
Yeah, I think that the question is more like what areas in the organization should be involved. And I would dare to say maybe all of them, right? Because patient engagement is fully transversal. Maybe Are you, as per your example, do you work with all the areas like market access, public affairs, clinical, commercial, so the marketing teams? Is that the right response?
Yeah, I would say from a company standpoint, involving all of your employees so everyone is tied to this mission and feels that true connection to the patient is valuable. And also from the patient perspective, getting insight into all areas of your company, all the functions, makes them feel like they are a part of your team and your mission.
True. Indeed, the next question is kind of connected to this one. I'm gonna ask Alisa about this, because the question is, to what function do you think in the organization that patient engagement should report to?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it really differs based on the organization and the culture. I sit in market access, which is really unique for an advocacy and government affairs function. But if you think about the access challenges that people have, it makes sense now. I think it really depends on your organization. Some report to medical affairs. I've done that before. And others are just in like a communications style, like a not marketing, not R&D, but like more of a external affairs function or communication function. I think it just depends on your organization. Some people have chief patient officers, and the size of your organization and where you are in the life cycle of your organization. So I don't think there's a right or wrong. It just really depends.
Agree.
Annabelle, may I add, Annabelle?
Sorry? Yes, Amy, please go.
You know, it's very interesting about the departments, and certainly, as Alisa and Shannon have both said, it depends on a lot of different areas. I can tell you by experience that when I was invited to speak to the executive committee of a corporation, and it was about why should we engage patients? That was the bottom line question. It was really about knowing my patient journey. How did I become a UN spokesperson after being crippled and on US disability for so long? They wanted to know what that journey was like and how this was an important piece for that company. After that, what we saw was the executive, the president and CEO, and the executive board began to infiltrate patient engagement into all aspects. Even legal had it, which I thought was very interesting. They had to be aware that the patient's voice was extremely important. And so from the, I don't want to say top down, but from the middle out, if you will, patient engagement as a concept was inculcated into most departments in a way that, again, those that were more related to research or touching patients' lives were much more distinct about what they had to do and what they needed to do. But certainly it was an awareness piece by the entire company.
And Amy, I just want to add to that really quickly. I think that's a great point. Some people that don't work with patients often and work really hard for the organization, when they do have that engagement and they do hear those insights, it just makes them feel so much better about what they do, and it's so rewarding. So it's great for employees also to really understand the outcome of all the hard work that they do.
Absolutely.
Agree. I know that we are almost running out of time, so I'm gonna remind the audience that from this, if you scan the code on the screen, you can download the playbook. And I'm gonna pass the floor. Well, I'm gonna bring it back to the team from MassMEDIC, Nicole, for her to have a final word. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. Well, I would just like to echo thanks. What an amazing conversation. I think it's fabulous. We're starting this conversation, and I'm excited to see what comes in the future. Thank you to Annabelle and Alira Health for leading this conversation. Thank you to all of our speakers, Shannon, Alyssa, Amy. It's been a pleasure. Everyone who registered for this webinar will receive a recording, and it's going to be on our YouTube, our MassMEDIC YouTube on demand. So if you were not able to join us live today, we hope that you watch it on demand, and visit massmedic.com to find our upcoming events. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you,
Thank
Nicole.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Annabelle.
much, Nicole and Annabelle.
Bye-bye. Thank you,
Take care.
everyone. Have a good
Ciao.
day. Bye.